two, 1, 2, 3.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt, the host today, and a member of Democratic Socialists of America locally. But really, I'm co-hosting or co-reporting with David Foote, secretary of the local DSA chapter. On June 7th, activists from all around New York State converged on Albany in the last week of the legislative session. There were actually activists there supporting many different causes, but one of the big ones was trying to bring the New York Health Act to a vote. The New York Health Act would establish a single-payer, a Medicare for all type system of health insurance within the state of New York. And of course, New York State, with approximately 20 million inhabitants, is way bigger than many countries that have their own systems. So if there's any state that can do it, New York is a prime one. I'm here with David Foote. Both of us went to Albany on June 7th. Perhaps, David, you'd like to talk a bit about the preparations?
So as Theresa mentioned, the two of us traveled to Albany with a number of other activists from Ithaca that represented the Democratic Socialists of America, New York Progressive Action Network, the Working Families Party, the Campaign for New York Health. And when we arrived in Albany in Washington Park, we found that there were others representing these organizations as well as the Poor People's Campaign, the New York State Nurses Association, and more. It was really exciting to find this large crowd gathered ready to take part in this action, everyone fighting for one goal. The New York State Nurses Association especially had brought noisemakers and umbrellas that were painted with slogans, a lot of signs to distribute. The people who organized this coordinated snacks at the starting point, water bottles, little spray bottles that people were running through the crowd, squirting in people's faces in a kind way. It was all about keeping people's energy up and on a very, very warm day and making sure that everyone was safe.
Yes, those umbrellas were brilliant because they would have come in handy in the rain, but they sure came in handy in the hot sun.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
It was a very hot day, and in fact, our contingent from the Ithaca area would have been significantly larger if a number of people had not dropped out, explicitly saying that they did not think they could take the heat. As it is, one of our mainstays was actually not from any of the organizations you mentioned, but from the Friends meeting, Jim Grant, who had spent much of his life in Louisiana and was equipped for the heat. I thanked growing up in the Washington, D.C. area before the time of air conditioning, and also living and exercising in New York City for my ability to withstand the heat.
Well, I'll say we brought some of the heat with us. The people that were there were pretty fired up. It started in Washington Park with a number of speeches, everything translated into Spanish. Easily over 100 people, I'm not sure of the exact count, but there was in the park speeches from primarily legislators, representatives, and others who were in their elected positions supporting the New York Health Act.
One of the speakers in Washington Park was Assemblymember Zohran Mamdani, recently elected as part of a joint New York City DSA campaign. so a socialist and also very eloquent.
We have to pass this legislation this year. We have done the studies. We have heard from the voters. We have heard from New Yorkers. This is not a negotiation. This is a demand you have made, and each one of us in the legislature must meet it in these next 4 days. Tenemos que pasar la ley porque se tiene que pasar en los próximos 4 días. We are told, do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Nos dicen, no dejes que lo perfecto sea el enemigo de lo bueno. We are told to wait until things work themselves out. Nos dicen, esperen a que todo se resuelva. But every day that we do not pass this is a choice. It is a choice to let the poorest New Yorkers die at the hands of profit and at the hands of this industry. Pero cada día que pasa es una decisión para dejar que los ciudadanos de Nueva York mueran en las manos del sistema de salud. And I want to say one last thing, which is that you are not just here to fight for New Yorkers. Your fight is not just going to benefit our neighbors in this state. When we pass this bill, it will be the landmark, it will be the path for every other state in this country. Quiero decir algo más, que no están peleando solamente por el Estado de Nueva York y la gente de Nueva York, sino que están peleando para hacer que el Estado sea un ejemplo para todos los estados de esta nación. So you are not just fighting for your friends, you are not just fighting for your family, you are fighting for every person in this country because we believe in solidarity, and that is what this bill is. Amigos, familiares, están luchando por cada persona en este país y eso es lo que esta ley significa. So I want to thank you all so much. Know that you give us courage, you give us belief, and you give us the hope that inaction will become a thing of the past and progress is going to be in our present and you will dictate our future. Thank you. Quiero agradecerles a todos por su coraje y por su confianza. Decirles que gracias a ustedes esto está sucediendo y que es solamente a través de ustedes que vamos a lograr el progreso para este estado.
And then there was another New York City Assembly member who spoke, a steady supporter of health care and other good things, Harvey Epstein.
District. Thank you for being here. Why are we here? Pass the bill. 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 So we have a choice here. We have a choice today. And the next 4 days of the legislative session, to talk about what we believe in, to talk about priorities.
Estamos aquí y en los próximos 4 días vamos a hablar de lo que importa, nuestras prioridades.
And decisions we all make today will impact generations to come.
Las decisiones que hacemos hoy van a impactar a las generaciones del futuro.
So the question we have to answer for ourselves is, what are we going to do? How are we going to show up?
La pregunta que tenemos que contestar es cómo lo vamos a lograr.
And here we're standing a few steps away from our state capitol saying, we're standing up for universal health care, we're standing up for the New York Health Act.
Estamos con los pies de la capital y estamos aquí demandando salud, el seguro universal para todos.
we're all here. But we're going to have to do more. We're going to have to fight harder. We're going to have to dig deeper if we're going to pass the most comprehensive universal health care system the country has ever seen.
Pero tenemos que luchar más fuerte que nunca. Tenemos que luchar para aseguranza universal para todos.
So let's march on the Capitol. Let's make our voices known. Let's keep this fight up. But when you leave here, you must continue the fight. Tomorrow, the next day, and the day after. Because this is a fight for our lives, fight for our future, and fight for our country that we cannot give up. This is our future. Universal health care for millions of New Yorkers is what we need.
Mañana y el día después tenemos que pelear por nuestras vidas, demandando a seguro universal para todos.
And the last message I'll leave with you is we can win this fight. We can win this with everyone together, fighting hand in hand, talking to our friends, talking to our neighbors, calling your elected officials saying, this is the fight for our future. We have this. It'll change the course of New York. It'll change the course of our country. It'll change the course of our families if we get the New York Health Act passed. I'm proud to stay with you, and I'm proud to be in this fight with you. Let's get it done. Thank you for being here today.
At a certain point, they started a march, and we traveled about a mile down one of the main roads in Albany to the legislative buildings. At about halfway down, we stopped and held an intersection for what must have been a good 15 or 20 minutes, which gave a chance for some of the folks with the Poor People's Campaign, ministers and other organizers with that effort, to stop and speak to the crowd while we blocked traffic and held the intersection. And I would say a lot of the drivers were fairly supportive. They were seeing our signs, they were honking and waving. I think we benefited from the fact that on the same day there was a parallel action by some unionized drivers who were fighting against Uber and Lyft changes to regulations that would destroy their livelihoods. That's probably a conversation for another day.
For sure. Although I suppose for people, for gig workers who don't get any health insurance on the job, an act like this would be very important.
Mm-hmm. So that ended up being an important solidarity action. They were saying they support us, we were saying we support them, and we all arrived at the same place in front of the Capitol building, the legislative building?
Yes, I believe it's the Capitol.
Okay. Where we stopped for many more speeches and a die-in in support of the New York Health Act. Now, Theresa's mentioned it was a very hot day, but a lot of respect to the activists who committed to this direct action of occupying the street, laying down on the hot pavement, with support from the organizers who supplied them with shade and water to the best of their abilities. Throughout there were some fairly energetic chants, saying things like fight, 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 healthcare is a human right, saying everybody in, nobody out, which was the tagline and theme for the day. And we heard in that location from some more impassioned speakers, which included our own legislator, our Assemblyperson Anna Kelles.
Ithaca and Cortland, Assemblymember Anna Kelles.
Nuestra siguiente habladora será la representante en la Asamblea de Ithaca y Cortland, Anna Kelles.
Gracias, Víctor. Bienvenidos a todos. Gracias por estar aquí, todos. Yeah. My mind is in like 10 different places with all of my colleagues trying to pass all these amazing bills. So I am going to work with my friend Víctor para traducir, to translate everything. I want to note, everyone, we're all dying in the heat right now. But let's just note everybody that is still lying on the 200-degree pavement if we all did the job that was in our heart, not because of finances. I want to say one more thing. I want everybody who comes from downstate, raise your hand and make some noise. Everyone from upstate, raise your hand and make some noise. We are universal. We are the people. We are everyone. Lastly, I am you. I am here because you are here, and I'm going to go inside and fight because you are in my heart. I love you!
And of course, because it was a protest, because it was a demonstration, there was a lot of signs and other materials on hand. One of the ones that I found most interesting was a sign that someone had mocked up one of the surprise bills that anyone who's had any interaction in the US healthcare system certainly has experience with. You don't just get the doctor's bill, you get a lot of different organizations, even within the same hospital, that add separate charges that are completely unexpected. Just one of the many horrifying things that people live through underneath the current healthcare system. Those who participated in the die-in had hand-painted tombstones that said things like, died from political cowardice, died from a broken heart, death by prior authorization, could not afford insulin, death by profit, just sort of highlighting the different ways that it has so many shortcomings, both in the profit motive, in the difficulty of accessing medication that could save one's life, and the fact that we were there to promote a bill that still hasn't passed, because those who are representing us just didn't take the initiative to bring it to the proper process.
Right. Well, to some extent, this is typical of what goes on in Albany. There's only really like a 5-month session that runs from January through the end of May and a little bit into June, and then they close down for the year, supposedly. And early in the session, the budget gets introduced, and then it's just budget, budget, budget until sometime in April. And then everything else that's on the agenda has to be brought to a vote, and it just can't all be fitted in. I mean, I can appreciate that they can't fit everything in. There is still the question of why something as important as this, something that would have so much meaning for so many people, does not get voted on.
Right. It can be hard for me as someone who's politically engaged for a long time, but only has spent about 4 years in organizing. I haven't yet adjusted to some of those realities. So it is very hard to see something like this that's not just very important, but very popular, still not get the traction we need to see.
So, in fact, what happened? Nothing happened in the end.
Mm-hmm.
However, something interesting followed. The New York Progressive Action Network, which kind of grew out of the Bernie Sanders campaign in New York State, has a member forum. And about the day after the failure of the Health Act, an incredible discussion broke out and has been going on for 3 weeks. A young and rather passionate activist first came out with a kind of fiery denunciation about our legislators lied to us, our movement leaders lied to us. It was kind of, we have to throw all the bums out and start over with a new strategy and completely from the beginning. A lot of people kind of said, wait a minute, cool it. This is very difficult. Healthcare is a huge chunk of the American economy. You don't change it easily. The forces who profit from the current system are huge. Insurance companies, of course, pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, for-profit hospitals, for-profit nursing homes. You know.
Yeah, I don't think it's even especially cynical to point out that the people who are in power under the current system benefit the most from maintaining that system. And that you can call it political cowardice, you can call it careerism, but the simple fact is, I think they understand that if they accede to a set of demands, we are prepared to then make more demands until everything that has made them comfortable for so long is completely upended.
Well, that may be part of it. Anyway, this young activist whom I'm just sort of making a little bit the straw man now, at one point quoted the old saw that to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results is the definition of insanity. And I actually wrote into the list that there were other bills where, in fact, exactly the same organizers had done the same thing year after year, again and again, and lost and lost and lost and lost until they won. It's not necessarily an approach that doesn't work. Or in the way some other commentator put it in a different context. You try, you fail. You try, you fail again. You try again, you fail better.
That's a very good point. I confess to having a few days of fairly discouraged points of view after the legislative session ended, with not just this bill, but others that we locally had been advocating for, just not getting the time of day. But you look at the history of the labor movement especially, and you just have to keep trying. Sometimes it took 15 years to get a successful union struggle, and even if there's a victory, you just prepare yourself for the next fight. And it's really good to see the coordination and the organization that went into this day of action, as well as some of the campaigns that we've seen ongoing. For example, the mayor of Buffalo, who just had a decisive victory this week for the DSA and for socialism.
Right, and we've had at least one electoral victory here, locally. Electoral victory by socialists.
Which came after a previous loss. More than one.
Yes. So certainly, certainly persistence pays off. My example of persistence was the HALT Act. The one to put limitations on solitary confinement. That's the one that was, went from having no co-sponsors to having Assembly co-sponsors to getting a few Senate co-sponsors, and on and on and on. Again and again and again, finally it passed. Both houses and the governor refused to sign it. And then this year, not only did it pass, the governor signed it.
And speaking to the potential of victory when you mobilize and when you organize, I think looking back to the early years of the Trump presidency, while the Affordable Care Act is imperfect and certainly not the system we want to see long term, there were a lot of people that worked really hard and sacrificed a lot just to keep that in place against the threat of people being kicked off of the health plans that they had. So we definitely want to keep working, keep organizing, communicating. It's the only way we're going to win, and it's the way we are bound to win.
I think we should mention some of the people from Ithaca. I only mentioned one, Jim Grant, who was one of the drivers. But there was a long-time health, campaign for New York health activist, Susan Beckley, Maribel Teneo, who has been active both in the campaign for New York Health and in a number of other causes locally. Emily Adams from Tompkins County Progressives and New York Progressive Action Network, Stephanie Heslop, and the two of us. The other interesting thing for DSA people was to look around and see others, people you didn't know at all, but they're wearing a DSA t-shirt or wearing a DSA mask. In fact, there was one moment when I photographed a banner, which it was not a DSA banner, it was a healthcare banner, and then realized one of the people who was holding it was wearing a DSA pin, and one of the people standing behind it was wearing a DSA mask. And quite often I would find somebody wearing DSA regalia and just say hi and point to my t-shirt, which also was identified as a DSA Medicare for All t-shirt.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I know there was a few there from the Capital District chapter, as well as Mid-Hudson Valley, New York City.
That's right.
And I'm not sure even exactly who else had
I
traveled.
talked to someone from Syracuse DSA.
Cool.
So I've been speaking with Ithaca DSA Secretary David Foote about the action in Albany in favor of the New York Health Act. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.